Good morning, everyone. My name is Ole Jakob Sending. It's my pleasure to welcome you all this morning to a seminar on trust, or the lack thereof, with a particular focus on China and relationships between China and other great powers. To discuss this, we have Professor Xu from Renmin University in Beijing. It's a pleasure to have you here, sir. In conversation with my good colleague Hans-Jørgen Gåsemyr, our China specialist. I should remind everybody to turn off their cell phones. I should also say that the event is streamed. And with that, I think I'll just hand it over to you. We look forward to your conversation. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. First of all, I'll also say that I'm very, very happy to be here with Professor Yinhong from Renmin University, who is not only a very prestigious and prominent scholar, but I think also extremely relevant for the topics we're discussing today. He has published extensively on especially China-USA relations, China-Japan relations, Chinese foreign policy strategies, international relations history, and so forth. I'm also happy to see you guys here to join our event. We will give you opportunity to ask a question towards the end. But first, we'll engage in a conversation. And I think it's fair to say that we live in a very eventful and hectic sometimes world if you consider international politics. And I think it's fair to say that China is very often either very near or right in the smack middle of the action of the, many of the big things that are happening, whether we talk about peace on the Korean Peninsula or brewing trade wars between China and the USA. We will return to those issues, I promise you that, but before that I'll want to talk a little bit about the domestic situation, particularly related to trust and distrust. And we know that the case of China is a bit special compared to many other countries. Chinese in general express very strong trust in their domestic national government and very strong trust in their domestic national institutions. And to start off, Professor Xu, I was wondering if you could try to explain us a little bit why that is the case. Why is the domestic trust so high in China?
First of all, I would like to pay my deep gratitude to this institute, very famous in the world for international studies, and also for my participation and with all of you in this meaningful discussion, and for which I am very grateful for this institute, and especially for the Hans, and because he personally invited me to be here, and also, of course, and with the agreement of our director. So, and this is a great day for me, and I expect there will be a meaningful discussion. And for the first question, I have to state it with some emphasis. If you look back the history of the long history of China, and the people's trust to their government, it has been not, far from, taken for granted. And there are some eras, and the government of, for example, some, Chinese kingdoms or even Chinese empire are not only had been not only disgusted by people, but hated by people, and sometimes because they are too corrupted, sometimes because the social gap are so terribly wide, and sometimes even at the same time they blame the government and let them to be conquered and even slaughtered by so-called barbarians. But of course, on the other hand, in Chinese long history, there are some really and brilliant period, and often happened in the beginning of a great dynasty, and the lasted for 50 years, 80 years, and so really, and longer than 1 century. and during which the social classes are satisfied with each other's, the positions and the living standard and justice and had been roughly, to realized, and especially the top leaders and the whole of the, state, the architecture had not been so corrupted. And so I think that if you looking back at history of the People's Republic of China, I think that they also have some different period. And in the beginning of the Republic, and especially because people worshipped and Mao Zedong, and he was really a strategic genius. He was really realized some social revolution. So in 1950s and in part of 1960s, I think that this government's prestige, which this means that the Mao Zedong prestige among people was so high, but gradually, I don't think that the people have not finally realized that the Mao Zedong and have a terrible governance, and he obsessed with so-called class struggle, and neglected economic development and neglected so-called the people's living standard. And so the Cultural Revolution, I think that partly and damaged very much and Mao's prestige and the government's prestige, which accumulated throughout so many years of revolution, war, and social change. And then Deng Xiaoping launched reform and opening up. And he paid great emphasis and primary attention to people's living and economic activity, connect with it. So, and he was a great leader and had a great prestige among Chinese people. But gradually, and every great leader has their faults. And Deng Xiaoping, despite of his great national, and party achievements, but he neglected something. And gradually people found that he neglected that the discipline over the party and made party and made political elites become gradually more and more corrupted. And so I think in this juncture, Xi Jinping taking over power, and he has been so ruthless toward everyone and in the high echelon. And because almost everyone in the high echelon had become somewhat corrupted. And so anti-corruption campaign is really greatly boost Xi Jinping's prestige and people's trust toward him. But of course, on the other hand, I don't think that Xi Jinping have any reason to be very self-compliant for himself, because up to now, he has only 6 years in power. And he now revised the constitution. He determined to stay in the top leader status and for maybe 15 years or even 20 years or even, and who knows, longer. So challenge is still in the future. Challenge is always in the future. What is challenges? I think that first, in the first place, the Chinese economy. And because of Deng Xiaoping and his successors, Chinese economy had become almost more and more modern economy. And modern economy, in some sense is monster. Even you control everyone, you still not necessarily control and manage modern economy and finance. I think that this is not so terrible for China's slow down going and GDP, the growth. The most terrible things, which strongly sensed by Xi Jinping himself, is increasing, financial risks within the country. And also, I think that the China now become a great power. And everyone said that China is would-be superpower. And so would-be superpower will face a lot of challenges, especially, the rivalry with established superpower in the United States. And especially accompanying with this volatile and Machiavellian Trump. And China now, for the first time, since end of Cold War in East Asia, which is 1972, and when President Nixon come to Beijing. Since that time, a U.S. president, for the first time, taken hardline position on both strategic trade front. And so, and also China have, because China have increasing aspiration for strategic space. So China's rivalry with some other and middle powers, especially Japan, especially India, and it is increasing, become more intensive. And looking to the future, I don't think that we have an easy answer. Xi Jinping have an easy answer for those international challenges, and also economically. We have increasing, the trade almost conflict with Europe. So I think that the last words is that the social trust to Xi Jinping, to Chinese government now is quite high, but Xi Jinping himself do not take this for granted, and the challenge is always in the future.
So high domestic trust is a challenge. We have, of course, from the outside, paid a lot of attention to the changes in the Chinese constitution. And as you say, that Xi Jinping might stay on as both the president and possibly also as a general secretary and commander of the armed forces. From the outside, that is looking a lot like China becoming a bit more authoritarian. What's the thinking inside of China? And what do you think that how that might relate to the issue of domestic trust in Chinese citizens, or average Chinese citizens' general trust in their government, that a person like Xi might carry on for longer?
And everyone, including you, know that the Xi Jinping is differently from Deng Xiaoping. And you see that a little more authoritarian, and this is very polite. And Deng Xiaoping, and because of Mao's later, bad governance, Deng Xiaoping and his old guard associates and received lessons. So they boost, not only boost economic development and open door, but also boost, the collective leadership principle, and also boost the so-called definition, the limitation of the top leaders' tenures, and so and so. But of course, I just mentioned that those brilliant leaders, they neglected one thing, this anti-corruption. So, and Xi Jinping mostly use of this, and to very much, to concentrate the power, all power in his own hands. And so, and this kind of things, and together with Xi Jinping's great aspiration, and the so-called resurgence of China's national greatness, domestically, internationally, to make him and really desire to have a longer term in power, and not restricted by 10 years limitation, and because he has justification, and he appreciates himself a great leader. He wants to change a lot of things. He wants to boost China into a really great status in the world. So he thinks that all national interests and party interests and shared to let the constitution, the regulation, and to revised. And so, of course, and because Deng Xiaoping, for example, and I'm now 67 years old, and most of my liberated, meaningful, life is spent on the Deng Xiaoping and his direct, successors rule. So we use the two, and for example, principle of collective security. And so some other, a lot of millions like me in my age, familiar with this, wonderful old days of, for example, principle of collective security and conservative and prudent foreign policy. So the revise of constitution to let the, the president's term without limitation, I guess, and although no one dare to discuss publicly, but I guess there has been a surprise, big surprise, to many people like me, or to many people even unlike me. And so I think that maybe for a week or 2 weeks, a month, people have doubts. But of course, every Chinese people, and including elites, are very pragmatic and traditionally shaped. So we began to use the tool. We cannot to save, so-called principle of collective leadership. So we should coexist with the principle of highly concentrated leadership. So we use the tool. So I do not say that this revised constitution damages serious social trust. I do not say. But of course, on the other hand, and this event, I believe, have not increased the social trust.
All right, it's tempting to spend the whole morning talking about China's domestic development, but we'll turn a bit more international first, and maybe starting with some regional issues. And of course, if you pay attention to the East China Sea or the South China Sea, or even look to India sometimes, it's the neighborhood around China is something prone to tension and even conflict. How would you describe the surrounding area around China when it comes to trust, regional trust and distrust?
I think structurally speaking, and there's no such easy things that our neighbors and most of neighbors could have so-called assured trust towards this drastically rising and great and massive neighbor. There's no such kind of things. And so it's quite easy to have increased distrust, increased tensions, increased worries among Chinese neighbors, and in the face of this dramatically rise China. And China has not only been dramatically raised, but China's foreign policy behavior in the past few years, compared with the past, has become much more assertive, much more and I cannot say aggressive, but much more assertive and based partly on China's pursuit for a more broad strategic space and a more broad and entitled Chinese strategic rights, and also based on something just like the Trumpism, and which is a psychological set, and now quickly and developed among Chinese people, and even among many officials within Chinese government. This is looking down upon others. And because we are so great, not only great in terms of strength, but also great in everything, our history, our tradition, our culture, and so on and so. So looking down upon every others. Of course, there are still, and I guess, a big minority and within Chinese elites that they still pay respect to the United States, but definitely they in their mind looking down upon everyone. And there's also a weak majority among Chinese elites and among Chinese people. Maybe they begin to looking down upon everyone, including the United States. So in this kind of situation, I think that the difficulties among Chinese peripheral will naturally increase. But still, and the situation dynamic. And I think that since the beginning of Xi Jinping's taking of the power, and in the beginning of 2013 to the middle of 2016, and this is a period, and his foreign policy and in maritime area and along the Chinese, especially East peripheral, and had been extremely assertive and hardliner. So the problem with the United States, as well with Japan, as well as other neighbors, and became very intensive at that time period. But since the middle of 2016, and many situations, and quite a dramatic change, our top leaders' behavior, foreign policy behavior, and toward the neighbors, and especially in the East. So since that time, and exactly speaking, since the opening of G20 summit in Hangzhou in September 2016, up to now, and there's dramatic moderation of Chinese threat posture in East Asia and in Southeast Asia. So now, and we have much improved relations, and overall around China's the peripheral, and we improve relations with Japan, improve relations, and with South Korea, and thanks for Jing, and he come to Beijing. We dramatically improve relations with North Korea, which in the past few years had kept in lowest point in history, and we improve relations with Philippines, and partly due to their very stringent and volatile President Duterte. And we improved relations last year with Vietnam, with Malaysia, and even with India. We and together with Indian Prime Minister Modi to prevent this more than 70 days military confrontation along the strategic critical area of the borders. And so I think that now in this juncture, and China's relations with in East Asia and Western Pacific and had become quite good, and especially compared with the past 4 years, with one exception, our relation with the United States, which become definitely even worse than ever before.
All right, we'll return to the USA, of course, but sticking to the regional issues, you talked about China behaving assertive, but also developing better relations. We also know that several countries, including China, but not only China, are investing significant sums and resources into military capacities. How significant is that development, do you think, for regional relations and trust?
I think that especially since 18th-Party Congress, which sponsored by the previous Secretary General Hu Jintao and launched the dual Secretary Xi Jinping, and especially since that, China's sustained military buildup have even more momentum and more resources invested, and China's armed forces and its capability and began to be much stronger than ever before. And so this is necessary, and to introduce arms race with the United States, and not arms race over all the world, just like the Soviet Union and in all the years with the United States, but definitely arms race and over the Western Pacific. And this arms race roughly can be divided into 2 stages. The stage first is recently until now, and during which China and dramatically increased strategic armed forces, strategic capability over over Western Pacific, and of course with the mind to compete with the United States and to defend the expanding of China's strategic rights and over Western Pacific. And that was very effective. And China quickly to shorten the gap of generation of military technology between China and the United States. The second, just because of this, there has been, just have began the second phase of this arms race, and much due to that, pro-military president Donald Trump, and he vigorously launched and according to Xi Jinping's own words, of course, have not published own words, that the United States now and determined to renovation of the gap of generation. And Trump and invest a lot and to begin to launch the technological escalation for everything from nuclear aircraft carrier to most advanced fighters to the nuclear intercontinental, long-range missiles to nuclear submarines to everything. So there is a possible and of course and a missile defense system. There's possibility or even probability from now on, and the Chinese military and Xi himself and face more pleasure and of American reawakened by China's military buildup, and so gap could be broadened and again. So I think that if China still keep its national military aspiration, China have to reinvest billions and billions of dollars to compete with the United States in a new phase of competition of advanced military technology.
All right, we'll talk more about the U.S. Very soon. But first, a lot of us, including yourself, I'm sure, has been paying close attention to the developments on the Korean Peninsula the last few weeks. Seen from China, how do you regard the recent developments, and how much can we trust that what's happening now might actually lead to a more positive and constructive and maybe even solution to a peace agreement and maybe even some kind of denuclearization?
North Korea's problem now is the most central issue and for Chinese government. So last week, the Central Authority issued the instructions to almost every journal, every magazine, every TV, and instructions that. And they are two most important and the most central issues. So not invite a scholar or anyone to say these two, talk about these two the topics. If they want to talk, and talk as little as possible. One is North Korea, or Korea Peninsula problem. Second is the trade confrontation between China and the United States. So
and here you are.
And so I don't think that I can say I represented the opinion of China, and this is my personal realization. I think the situation to me is very clear, and although Kim Jong-un's dramatic initiative still take everyone in surprise, the most fundamental fact number one is, Kim Jong-un now have or very near to have operational nuclear middle-range missiles, and this is a decisive factor. And so this means that the executive United States president is a complete and a crazy guy. So Kim Jong and North Korea have had at least a minimum nuclear deterrence against the United States, against Japan, and I don't think that against South Korea he need nuclear weapons. He have artilleries. So this led to second important fact. And because of this, and Kim Jong for the first time since his grandfather and father, and finally North Korea can really to realize partial denuclearization if an American president gave North Korean leader some phased concessions which is satisfactory at each stage for Kim Jong-un. And partial nuclearization means that he could really, seriously, and no cheating, and if face the concession from Trump, and to dismantle the nuclear ICBM, intercontinental missiles, which, of course, very famously regarded by the United States are most threatening and to U.S. security. And he also called very sincerely and to make assurance under inspection. He will not develop any new type of nuclear weapons, for example, submarine, launched missiles, nuclear missiles. He only want to keep middle-range nuclear missiles. And this could make the negotiation between Seoul and Pyongyang, between Washington and Pyongyang, for the first time for many years become serious business. It could produce a lot of things, but except a complete, assured denuclearization. And do not forget, all the dramatic changes of the situation in Peninsula come from sustained Kim Jong-un's initiative from the first day of this year. Everything due to that. And he is very clear. And he is now suddenly become much more peaceful, much more reasonable, much more diplomatic than previous North Korean leaders. Why? Because he already have. So this means that the military confrontation, military dangers, and dangers of breakout of war at the Peninsula are dramatically reduced. This means that North Korea began to began to become a power to diplomatically engage with everyone, with South Korea, with the United States, with China, and their diplomats now have a very active activities in Europe. And this means that, according to my prudent, optimistic, or prudent, pessimistic point of view, that the maybe complete solution of nuclear problem of North Korea and cannot be realized. But we still could have a prospect of gradually solving North Korea problem. This means that nuclear possessed, limitedly possessed, and North Korea and could have, just like an indication in these days show, could have, compared with the past, much more peaceful and constructive and prudent foreign policy. So finally, and great powers and have paid great efforts and almost exhausted their efforts in the past 15 years, want to denuclearize them and completely, but had been failed. So I guess United States as well as China, and finally, and will be forced to accept nuclear North Korea and by de facto, and if, and it could be easy, if this North Korea become much more and responsible, peaceful, and reasonable. So I think that the great game and is just began, and now it successful in the first, drama. This is a summit between North and South Korea, and quite successful. And of course, Trump is a difficult guy. He has more difficulty, for example, the Biden and national security advisor. But generally, and to have some denuclearization, to show some, success in the terms of denuclearization, and to show to it to American people and show to it to himself is very attractive. So I believe that they will produce some substantial, although still limited, and fruits from Trump and Kim Jong-un's summit. And so I think that the situation become much more better than last year. And so this is why everyone want to pursue the process. Everyone want to follow Kim Jong to play the game.
All right, so a relatively rational, if not a bit optimist conclusion, but with many ifs and conditions. And of course, looming behind any solutions with the two Koreas is China and the USA. And China and US relations have always been complicated, and it's one of the areas where you have focused a lot of attention. Could you, in a few words, try to give kind of an overall assessment of what is the level of trust and engagement between the US and China right now?
In some sense, I hate the term trust. And, build up some, strategic trust between two capitals. And efforts come from Brookings Institution during Obama's years. It failed. Why? And if you every day focus on trust, then you lost the mind about the most substantial things. You look at the past history of between Beijing and Washington, and especially under Obama, and with which and Hu Jintao engaged with him, and Xi Jinping engaged with him. There are a lot of summits, a lot of communiques, a lot of rhetorics. Everything is wonderful. And but as soon as they look at concrete major, problems, whether trade or South China Sea or arms race or everything, and you found that the U.S. president and Chinese presidents belong to the people, very reluctantly to make major concessions to each other. So the problem is not trust. Problem is realistically to clarify the vital interests, then to see and what kind of the concessions you could make to other side in exchange of major concession from other side. And if you pay this perspective, I don't think that both U.S. presidents and Chinese presidents and has been successful in in managing the relationship in the past years. And so, quick. So I often, and especially during Obama years, and when political elites in China and the United both had the sounding great songs about build up a strategic trust, I said that Bismarck never say the word trust. He always careful to deal with the problems and to think of carefully what German Empire can make some, the concessions, and to other side to build some temporary, international cooperation. And so because, and I don't trust the trust. I think that what is good businessman? Good businessman is to abide the contract, to do the good, and to meet your words, and other side also meet your words. So this still competitive at the market, but they can trust each other because each other could be expected to be a responsible merchant, and without any romantic words or feelings, but still could deal with, the deals quite, constructively and keep the relations stable and finally fruitful.
All right.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's fine. We like you to speak your opinion, and I'll be a bit cautious before I use the word trust again. We can focus on strategic interests and institutions, and I will bring trust in and distrust sometimes. But if we focus on the current affairs, state of affairs between the U.S. and China, we of course know that the U.S. has complained for many years about trade imbalance. The Trump government has been very particular about protecting its tech industries and other industries that it feels that Chinese activities is harming. Are we currently in the start of a trade war, or how trade war-like could things become, you think, before the two sides would go to the table and use institutions and other means to solve those problems?
This kind of situation has very structural and profound sources, and about which people in the world, especially people in China, and have belated recognition. If you look at Brexit, if you look at the election of Donald Trump, if you look at all the similar, all those smaller developments across the advanced world, you found that, and a large part of social or even economic basis, and for a liberal globalization, for a liberal trade policy in the advanced countries is losing. And this is a very profound change in the world. And this is what I called the global political climate change. So, and you look, if you meet so-called grassroots, white grassroots in the United States, they hate Wall Street, they hate Washington, because in their perspective, which do not forget, millions and millions, in millions and millions perspective, that the Washington and Wall Street and the liberal elites let the United States exploded by everyone, especially for years by Chinese. So this is not an issue of truth. This is not an issue of statistics. This is a political fact. So in this fact, China, and including China top leaders, very belatedly recognize. So in many years, and they enjoyed this liberal globalization, which of course benefit to China enormously. So for many years, they pay not much attention to this, so-called trade structure, which every year to give China enormous surplus. On the other hand, and give the United States and some other countries enormous, deficit of trade. For many years, although Chinese leaders promise to broaden market access to advanced countries' capital, but words is much, much more frequent than deeds. So up to now, And compared with 5 years ago, 10 years ago, China market access broadening degree is quite limited. And for many years, and because Chinese leaders, the Communist Party, and a lot of Chinese elites, and a lot of Chinese people believe in Chinese system, so state control. And state control for many direct and indirect control over many domestic and foreign trade activities. And so at first, complaints, strong complaints from United States, from Europe. And Japan is exception. And no use. You complain, we don't care. They're angry. No use. You angry, we don't care. Then come Trump. The threat of trade war. The threat of trade war is very severe. And not only have high tariff to impose upon whole range of across China's merchandise export to the United States, but also the very severe threat of the beginning of blockade of China's technological direct investment in the United States and ZET event. And also, and there is, you look at within the United States, a minority of think tanks, of CEOs, of economists say, Trump, you are attracted toward China, now is wrong. But situation you described is right. And in Europe, it's the same. And no one U.S. members of Congress, even Democrats, publicly criticize Trump's trade war threats against China. And in Europe, and think that no sympathy toward Trump on his tactics, on his concrete approaches, but enormous sympathy toward his complaints and toward the picture he described. So, and of course, Trump, the real trade war is something which is a trade conflict, lasts for a period. And I don't think this kind of things will happen. But the assumption that, and both sides, in order to avoid this kind of real trade war, which damaged both sides very much, and will make concessions, major concessions. So today, who expect the United States and Mr. Trump make bigger major concessions to China than China made? Of course, China made. China well made, compared with the past, extraordinary major concessions in terms of reduce the trade surplus, to broaden substantially market access, and to reduce and in a substantial degree state control over foreign trade practice. China well made. Otherwise, China now finally realize, otherwise that liberal and benefited China globalization could not be sustained. So China well made. But of course, China still want to bargain with Trump. And next week, and almost all the important members of Trump's cabinet on economic affairs will come to Beijing. This will some, hard negotiations. And of course, and if negotiations fail, and we could expect a real trade war in the next few months. If negotiations real successful, this means that China will make extraordinary major concessions in order to defend this and or at least defend the remnants of liberal globalization. And so, and maybe at the next stage, when China made major concessions to the United States in terms of reduce state control, reduce surplus, reduce broaden market access, then next week, next month, Brussels will send high officials to follow the United States. They will say to Chinese leaders, "Guy, we want most favored nation treatment." So,
all right. So a very real threat of trade war situation, but we're still waiting to see what will happen next week and whether institutions and negotiations may solve it. It's tempting to stick to the US-China relations, but there are more issues I want to cover. It's been, it's a very eventful times in international politics. The 10 last years, the 5 last years, even this year. One of the big events that preoccupy a lot of Europeans is, of course, our strained relations to Russia. In the same period, China seems to be warming up its relations to Russia. How significant do you see that change? And what is a more mid or long-term scenario of the China-Russia relations?
International politics sometimes is very simple, just like arithmetic. This is a simple mechanism. And the assumption is that if Russia have a very, tense and even military confrontation with the West, if at the same time China have intensive strategic rivalry with the United States, then conclusion will be inevitable. And a strategic cooperation, military cooperation between China and Russia and could be assured. And so this is very simple. And I think at the present situation, one thing is assured. And in the practical future, and intensified strategic rivalry between China and the United States is assured. And Russian relations with the West still have some, possibility of temporary flexibility. And because you Europeans always have a second mind that have some regrets to have so intensive confronting with Russia. And the United States, Trump have a great, second thoughts. And because he desired to have a good relation with Mr. Putin, but himself's behavior and in U.S. domestic politics prevent him to do that. So in long, I think that this kind of situation assured that there might be sustained and strategic military cooperation in principle between Beijing and Moscow. But on the other hand, and matters in the world has been determined not only by structural factors, but also determined by situational factors. Situational factors is very difficult to predict because it's have a lot of contingencies. And generally, I think that China is prudent. China don't want to be drawn into any, major conflict with any other powers, and because of Russia. And Russia's national interests is only partly compatible with China's national interests. So Russia, and at least if you look at Kremlin, in the past 3 or 4 years, their behavior has been excessively aggressive. So China take care. And China is very smart in this respect. China always pay good words to Moscow, but very prudent in China's deeds. And for example, and the previously, and the voting mode of China's representative in the Security Council, UN Security Council over Syria is exact same with that of Russia's. But shortly after the Florida summit between Xi Jinping and Trump in last April, and not this April, in last April, and this voting mode changed. And Russia vote no to several the Western countries' resolution and to sanction against Syria. But China vote absent. And except, until very recent now, when Trump becomes so clear to be confrontational on both strategic and trade front, voting mode in Security Council of China's representative changed again. And in last 2 votings, China vote same no with Russian representative. China take care. And the Russian values to us mainly is the export to China of some desirable advanced military hardware and technology. And only Russian can provide it with China, because everyone, and including Israel, including EU, follow American instruction not to, to export advanced military hardware to China. So Russian provide us. So this is quite important. And also, and I don't know, but Xi Jinping at least is a strategist. Sometimes strategists think that in abstract term, and if in the future worst case happen in this part of the world, in Asia or Western Pacific, if at the same time our Russian friend and to make some big events in Europe or elsewhere, this will reduce our pleasure. And so China take care, and we will keep our strategic partnership with Moscow, but we will not to support their actions, and especially when these actions, and including some things committed which damage or invade other people's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
All right, let's stick to the big picture, or the big global situation that you start talking about. I think a general conclusion about China's development in international affairs is that it's both getting, at the one side, more demanding and want more influence, but at the other side is also getting more engaged and for more types of cooperation. And that ranges a whole bunch of interesting questions related to not only international trust, but cooperation, lasting or changing institutions, the rules of the world or the world system. And starting with the last, what kind of a world or a world system, if you use that term, is it that China really wants?
I don't think that China have a clear idea about this. And China now mainly pursue one sort of activity. China wants recognition. China wants recognition as a great power, and have its compatible and strategic rights and political rights and rights of economic existence overseas, and which other great powers and in the past and at the present had enjoyed. And this is a quite almost a reactive and a simple demand. And of course, at the same time, accompanying with the rise of China's strength and national aspiration, China have already begun to think of what kind of the international order China wants. I still think that they have not a clear idea, because the problem is that, and not only China focuses most of its activities and demands on the requirement of recognition, but also China's behavior, and still have a long distance from other societies, other countries in the world, other people in the world, expect from a so-called leader on reform international order. And if you look at the trade front, so many people complain that China have its new mercantilist practice and enormous surplus and relatively not so open domestic market and state control of domestic and international economic activities. And this kind of a guy, and like China now, have natural difficulties to think of and to let alone design an international order which at least could, agreed with by so many other people in so many other regions. And for better time, for example, South China Sea problem. China said publicly by formal statements of Chinese government, that all our sovereign claims and our claims on easy rights is based on our historical right. What is historical right? And so I think that based on our historical right, this kind of claim is basis of China's claims on South China Sea. But this kind of claim, although it approves by Chinese people, and which have 1.3 billion, men and women, But even Russia never publicly recognized that China's claim really is rightly based on China's history rights. So I hope that the dramatic improvement of relations between China and ASEAN and its member states, especially happened last year, could produce quickly even a very ambiguous and a roughly written and a code of conduct on South China Sea. If we have these things, and we could not every time refer to that unpopular claim of history rights, we could refer to the codes of conduct on South China Sea. So these are several illustrations. It means that China still have a long way to go, and as a great power, and to have its suggestions or demands or proposals to reform the international institutional order, and which could be opposed at least by a large part of other countries and other societies. We still have a long way to go.
Big issues, hot topics. We'll have to invite you back many times to discuss in more detail. I will soon open up for questions, but a couple more questions from myself related to what we have been talking about just now. China has in recent years, or over the last decade and so, initiated or been part of initiating quite a few new international institutions. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, of course, the New Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and so forth. Will we see in the next few years China initiating more international institutions? And what type of areas do you think China will kind of invest more resources when it comes to international or regional cooperation?
Well, I think that it's a big difference from Xi Jinping and his predecessors. That Xi Jinping is really compared with much more aspired to deepen and broaden China's involvement in a global political economy and issue areas of global governance. And accompanying with that aspiration and including China's national resources, which could be invested in these fields, and China take and in a short time span, only several years, China take initiative and to do and some big things which get a lot of attention. And but still, and China's resources is limited, and China's aspiration sometimes could be changed. And also, and everyone have to look at the issue of cost effectiveness. So, for example, and of course, China as the biggest emission country in the world now play a very important role in support of the Paris climate change accord process, especially when the United States represented by Trump withdrew from this process. China now and is, and let alone desire to be, one of two leaders in addressing the climate change in the world. Another leader is Europe. And for example, also, the Shanghai and Cooperation Organization, this is regional. And China take more initiative to shape and broaden this organization, but still, and at least they are not two leaders. Central Republicans will hate this. And Russia and take a great role, also just like China. And also, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a very pragmatic organization. And in their declaration, there are so few fuzz of rhetoric. They focus on, border security. They focus on the anti-terrorism, and they also, in degree of feasibility, they promote the trade among member states. AIIB is quite complicated issues. This, of course, China take initiative to establish AIIB. But AIIB is really international financial institution. And a lot of Western countries, including non-Western countries, including China have no, rights of veto. And AIIB is international financial institution. If it want to issue some loans, and this institution could have a much strict, standard than China's unilateral government fund, Silk Road Fund, and so on and so. So you can look at AIIB up to now, 2 years after its establishment, it still have not issued any major, loans to any country. And also, and this related to more broader, aspiration of China on Belt and Road. A road is in Indian Ocean and South China Sea. And there had been enormous strategic activities. Indians are very passive, and even on some issues are opposing in public. And Indian Ocean and South China Sea, this strategic competitive area. And so it's really much more easier than so-called Silk Road, than the maritime Silk Road, than the Eurasia, the belt. But belt is, who can assure it will be an economically profitable enterprise 10 years later? So AIIB. I hope that the AIIB are too strict financially. It still have not issued substantial funds. And Chinese government issued a lot of money through China's unilateral government fund. But where's the profitability? So I hope. And belt, generally, at least within 15 years, is economic, unprofitable enterprise. Please invest in. Let China reduce its investment. But other countries are not stupid guys. So I think that do not appreciate, Belt and Road so much. And it could increase China's diplomatic influence. But it could also make China lose a lot of money and in a long time. And also it could brought about diplomatic benefits to China. But it also could have a risk to make China involved deeply, increasing deeply, increase widely with so many different people. And they have different interests, different traditions, and they have religion. We have no religion. And they have different religions. So I think that of course, it could be wonderful, successful for everyone, including China. It also could be something which finally reminds us and other empires why they failed in those underdeveloped areas.
All right. I think you tapped into the very last question I was planning to ask. I don't think I can invite a Chinese foreign policy scholar from China coming to our part of the world to talk without mentioning Belt and Road. And now, lastly, you talked a bit about Belt and Road. And since time is running, I think I'll open up for questions from the public. I have a long list of questions myself, if you hesitate to ask. But you are here as well, so I give the floor to, there's quite a few people. So we'll start in the front. And I'm just reminding you that the event is being streamed, so you will speak to the world. And it's also fine if you're happy to state your name and if you represent an institution. And then, please, if you have, stick to questions that Yinhong will be able, that he might respond to. If you have comments, make them extremely brief, and we will be around, and Professor Xu will be around afterwards. So please limit comments and stick to clear questions.
Thank you. And speaking to the world, I'll introduce myself, Odd Gunnar Skagestad. I'm an old age pensioner and an independent analyst and a writer of a number of books. I have one question to Professor Yinhong Shi, and that concerns what he described as the arms race. I think you expressly emphasized that this is limited to the Western Pacific, at the moment anyway. Now, China has recently established a naval base in Djibouti in Africa. So my question is this something which may indicate a new phase an extension of China's activities and possibly also including what could be an arms race? And how does this fit into the Belt and Road Initiative? Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, this is a good question, and pointed to one of the increasingly important aspects of China's foreign policy. And China now, and over many years, have a widespread economic presence in different continents. And China also, and people can imagine, China also think of the future. And so in order to protect China's increasing economic presence, and also in order to create some conditions to compatible with China's, as a great power, the future strategic aspirations. And so China and now establish a base of maritime supply, and government never told its military bases, and supply in jeopardy. This is the beginning. And you could expect that in the future, China could have more of the same sort of things. And but to please, and the pace of become this kind of thing become more for China around the world would be slower, much slower than and in the past Americans and even British and French. And also, I think this is not arms race. This is only a secondary or thirdary aspects. Arms race is so clear. Now happening at sea. And 1 or 2 weeks ago, when China conducting South China under Xi Jinping's personal supervision and biggest and military drills, Navy drills in South China Sea, which the biggest in terms of history since 1949. 46 warships, 78, the airplanes, and this kind of things in sea, in air, and in cyberspace, and in outer space. I think that the shortest gap exists in the area of outer space weaponry. And up to 2 years ago, China already have successfully conducted as many as 8 times of successful the satellite missile launch test. And this is arms race. And arms race is most potentially dangerous things for Sino-American relations in the long future. But it's very strange and even, puzzle, bizarre. And up to now, both Washington and Beijing never publicly refer to this arms race. They never have any dialogue, let alone negotiation, on this kind of arms race. And so in this sense, Sino-American strategic relationship compared with, Soviet-American strategic relationship, which began in 1972 when President Nixon visited Moscow to sign with Brezhnev arms control accords. They're very primitive. So I appeal to Chinese government and within country, and you should actively consider begin arms, control process with the United States. And arms control means that China will reduce or delay some of its strategic arms build-up efforts, but in exchange to slow I think that maybe very worrisome American launching of all across range escalation of the technology of their armed forces. So arms race, I think, necessarily will become more intensive than before because Trump is pro-military. And Trump not only have American first economic slogan, he have peace through strength, American strategic slogan. And you look at Xi Jinping, I think that in his mind, I guess his mind, he most valued the title is Supreme Commander of Chinese Armed Forces. He already declared again and again that the Chinese armed forces should be world-class armed forces and within these few decades. This means that at least in the Western Pacific, especially in western part of Western Pacific, and from China Sea coast to the first island chain, China, during his tenure, military become even stronger than the United States in this, the strategic space. So,
all right, big issue again. We'll have to return to that later. Since I've seen many hands, since only men have spoken so far, I think I'll give the word to you. But I've seen also the men out here, so it's not like I haven't seen you.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Hilde Salvesen from the Norwegian Center for Human Rights. We have been involved with programs in China for 20 years, especially in human rights education. My question goes to you regarding the global ambition of China, because as you also indicated, that is a quite new dimension. And we know that traditionally, during the last years, values have been respect for national sovereignty, non-intervention. So how is this global ambition going to express itself? And especially I'm thinking of within the United Nations. Will we see a UN with Chinese characteristics?
I don't think that ambitious leaders, even Xi Jinping, have such kind of ambition, have UN with Chinese characteristics. If you have a UN with Chinese characteristics, that means that you will know UN. And even American presidents, since end of Cold War, they never dare to say we have a UN with American characteristics. Of course, and China have increasing aspiration to become more and more active and important player in the global stage. And China's national interests and its more and more active diplomatic activities let China begin to have some conditions to become such kind of actor. But on the other hand, and still there are some gaps. The first gap is that China is not necessarily clear of in the next stage of history, and China should focus on what kind of institutional activities. The second is connected with the issue of soft power. And China now is very worldly popular in some area, but unpopular in other areas. And China have no luxury intention to become popular on all those areas. And there's a trade-off with Chinese characteristics. China could pay more equal money, could send, for example, more soldiers to field the UN peacekeeping missions. And China could play more important role in some international mediation of the armed conflict. But I don't think that Chinese leaders are prepared to become, in a very quick pace, popular in human rights field. So this is a calculation. And of course, even in human rights front, the situation become much, messy. And then a few years ago, at that time, it seems, and not only in the eyes of advanced country people, but in the eyes of many developing country people, that the situation is very clear. And the Europeans, and in a less degree Americans, together with Japanese and so, are defenders of human rights. And China, Russia, some are in different degree, not so wonderful and far from wonderful in human rights practice. But now the situation is messy. U.S. president never talk about human rights. U.S. president never talk about liberal democracy. So you Europeans become somewhat isolated. So China, how can you expect China in this kind of situation pay more concessions on human rights because of international pleasure? So you still could have a more responsible China, and even a China which, although and it still try to improve its domestic human rights practice, but it become less willing to make concessions, and at least to Brussels, on human rights practice.
Now again, extremely tempting to return to my own questions, but I will respect you. So Stein first.
Stein Tønneson, Peace Research Institute, Oslo. First, an extremely brief but necessary remark. An exclusive economic zone, EEZ, is claimed on the basis of distance from land, and it can be up to 200 nautical miles. So it's not strange that Russia and all other countries in the world have not accepted the Chinese claim to an EEZ based on historical rights. This is simply because that claim runs contrary to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which China proudly signed in 1982 and ratified in 1996. My question is about Xi Jinping's emphasis on the army and the army reform, which has been very radical, I understand, in structure with the purging of many generals and so on. And he said at the 19th Party Congress that he wants an army that can fight real wars. China bases its power on peaceful development, like Japan and Germany. It has not so far, or not since 1988, been engaged in any combat abroad. Very contrary to Russia, the United States, Britain, France, other great powers that base it on war. How long can China continue with that when it now has such a strong force? Can it do without combat experience? Where and how could it get it?
Oh, this is which in China, many people talk about for many, many years. This means that you have a peaceful China in practice, but you have increasingly a China not so peaceful in words, in their minds. So yes, since 1979, our armed forces never, do a real combat and even a battle, let alone war. And so necessary. And this is so-called the untested armed forces. And but the new development is that this untested armed forces, especially because of the Supreme Command, and want to do sooner or later become armed forces, which called not only fight a real fight, but win the real fight. And so, and of course, the least desired thing is massive armed conflict with the United States. And no one can any degree sure that China could win this kind of conflict. But we can make the United States relatively neutral, means that not launch a massive U.S. armed intervention. And under this condition, we use our force, and sometimes in a limited scale, sometimes in a larger scale, and not necessarily war, but including cursive diplomacy, armed threatening, and limited military conflict in South China Sea. And if the U.S. not launch massive intervention, we can beat everyone. And we especially, and hope that use our threat of armed forces, or if necessary, limited scale of use of force to fix the Taiwan problem. And of course, why, and I always said this to remind my colleagues and my government, and do not have 100% confidence. You should have to prepare for question of what about next. And for Taiwan, especially for Taiwan, I believe that the Xi Jinping determined to, during his tenure, and to make a historic breakthrough of reunification with Taiwan process. But also, I reminded them that you should not forget what happened in June 27, 1950. President Truman already and publicly declared that we want to abandon, South Korea. But if South Korea take this kind of a colossal border massive attack, and American mind can overturn overnight. And so I think that if you look at the United States and their president, and structurally, and they have relatively decreasing strength. And politically, less American public want to have a real war to share the American soldiers' blood for others' business. So in this kind of situation, Northern China have increasing chance to beat someone or to intimidate someone without superpower Washington's massive intervention. So this is China's chance. So I think that this is what I said, that you believe us in history because we are really peaceful in practice, but we now begin to be a little less peaceful in our mind.
All right, I'll try to squeeze in a few more before I have to let you go out in the sunshine. There was a question here. Okay, then in the back.
Professor Xi, my name is Lou Coatney. I'm an American over here in Norway for some small children. Our RAND Corporation has told Congress that we may not be able to defeat either Russia or China. And right now, we seem to be strategically pitted against both. Now, a few months ago, China and Russia had joint naval exercises off of Estonia, shore bombardment exercises, which must have made the Estonians nervous. And then a few weeks ago, your defense minister was in Moscow to express the solidarity of your military alliance. If the West escalates its confrontation with Russia in Syria or Iran or, worst of all, Ukraine, and Russia requests Chinese troops to help man its borders since Russia is so manpower short, will China send troops? Number two, if we start a war with Russia, maybe with false flag attacks or something, will we automatically be at war against China?
I think that, of course, there are two seemingly opposite fundamental facts about Sino-Russian strategic partnership. One is, and both countries, Beijing and Moscow, has been really strategic military partnership. The second fact is that they are not allies. Whether Russian president or Chinese president in any degree, and both countries in any degree issue any statement to let people think that they have a formal alliance commitment to each other. No. So in some sense, and this is something and in the middle between so-called the inevitability and opportunism. And I think that because both Russia and China have some very vital interests, which is not other parts' concern. And first, the geography decides it. Russians have much less ambition in old names is Far East. China only have diplomatic and economic ambition in Europe. So if Russia launch a war, or even American side launch a war in Middle East and in Syria or in some Eastern Europe, I extremely doubt that China will send substantial, real military assistance to that front. Of course, we still shall pay respect and lip service to military strategic alliance. Chinese government will issue the statement that we strong support Russia and condemn the Western and those military conflict. And China will, of course, maybe send a little money and some information, and this is very limited. Russia is the same. How can you expect any Russian president to, use Russians' very shortage of money and even very shortage of, the human resources because they are too much of lack of vodka to sacrifice their life and use their money and for China's, for example, China's dispute in South China Sea or problem of Taiwan. No way. But of course, this is what the nature of China and Russia partnership. Strategic, yes, but definitely not alliance. And I still have not, to see anything which indicate in the future that could transform and Russia and the Chinese relationship into something just like the Imperial Germany and Austria-Hungary, for example.
Again, big issues, big issues. I'll try to fit in a couple more questions before we have to end. There is one here.
Hi, Ilaria Carrozza from the London School of Economics. If I could push you a bit on the North Korea issue, I wonder, does China, now that the two leaders have met and that Trump is set to meet with Kim, does China fear being sidelined in the talks? And more provocatively, maybe, does China even want the two Koreas to reconcile in the first place? Thank you.
I have already answered this question 100 times in the past months. And I just get the comeback from London last week. And I think that you look at the situation in Beijing-Pyongyang relationship before Kim Jong-un's surprising visit to Beijing. And more than 1 year, and kept in the lowest point in history. And why? Of course, North Korea have their faults. They have always, for most of the time, even since time of Mao Zedong and Kim Jong-un's grandfather, they are not so friendly toward China. Second, they dramatically developed their damned nuclear missiles, and which brought about a lot of strategic military reaction from the United States, from Japan, and from South Korea, which damaged to China's long-term security. And third, they are nuclear test site, and is nearer to China's border than to Pyongyang itself. But also, this is China's fault. Since Trump, immediately after Trump elected as US president, to the first day of this year, when Kim Jong-un launched his initiative, China, 6 to 7 times, under American pressure, American threat, and American coercion, to squeeze North Korea in a increasing wider and increasing strict form. North Korea have nothing to love us, because we follow the United States reluctantly, somewhat reluctantly, to want to economically strangulate them. And you go to Beijing, if again, every North Korean's restaurant close out, every North Korean labor drop into home. Everything is suspended. Only, together with Russia, supply of 4 million barrels of low oil. So, when Kim Jong-un launched his big, game, and big things will happen, and he want to make historic, gamble or with American president as well as South Korean president. But China know nothing. So this is quite dangerous. North Peninsula is so important, historical strategy important to China. But China know nothing of what will historical happen about Peninsula. So we have a desire to improve dramatic relation with Pyongyang. Kim Jong-un is the same. For his historically untested extraordinary gamble, he become not so confident because he have a very bad relation with Beijing. And also, he could speculate that if his talk with Trump failed, and how, to secure the North Korea and his personal security totally without China's friendship. So he also have motivation. So this is a historical moment that both. So China's relation with Pyongyang had been drastically improved. But still, and we only, as Chinese, only enter the room. This room is some black box, and within which some historical things, drama will happen. We enter the room. But due to what we do brutally to North Korea last year, so we enter the room, but we still can only sit at the bench and beside the door. So we should to gradually near to the central table. And when Kim Jong-un in Beijing, and according to Xinhua News report, long length report, Chinese leaders emphasize what? Most emphasis is that, and just like Hu Jintao emphasis when Kim Jong-un's father come lastly to China, and both countries should communicate to report each other each other important domestic international decisions. And we know nothing. And of course, Kim Jong-un in Beijing told us something, and not told me. I know nothing. Told Xi Jinping. But how can he told Xi Jinping most of things in his mind? And so we still have a task, very important, to continue to improve further relations with Kim Jong-un. Let us have a chance to stand up from the bench at the door to nearly and to some place called see something happen in the closed central table.
All right, I think we'll have to end it at that. I know there are more questions out there. I've seen several of your hands. I know many of you, and I know that you have probably very brilliant questions, but we cannot keep you here any longer. But I encourage you to come forth and discuss with Xi afterwards. I'm sure he'll be happy to be around for a little while.
My last word is thank you, everyone, and here, especially for those excellent questions. And also thank you as brilliant guiding and guided me to have this meaningful the discussion. And the final words is that I don't know so much. I'm a scholar, I guess. And so, for example, Chinese government never will say that we only just enter room and sitting on the beside the bench. No, they always claim we are always in central stage, but you don't believe. And so it's very easy. And if you want to study China, you should look at China, respect China, but sometimes have a sense that what they say for domestic purpose is not necessary and in their mind.
Thank you, Shi. Such a pleasure to have you here. I'm so happy that I'll get to spend more today and some of tomorrow with you. For all the rest of you, happy to see you here. Please come back and visit. Next seminar in the Trust Seminar series is about Russia and dealing with China and Asia. Of course, NUPI will keep hosting excellent events and hopefully also invite Professor Yinhong back to discuss more very soon.
Also, thank you very much. And yesterday you told me that you will raise a sharp question, and you have not raised it. Thank you.
All right.